Well, look, I mean, we were building nuclear power plants, 60 years ago. And so we should be better at it now, especially at the modular level. So one of the things I'm curious about, well, two, I suppose, is to what degree does insane regulation make nuclear power unbelievably expensive? And then the second question would be, given that insane regulation does make nuclear power extremely expensive, do you think there's any possibility at all, practically speaking, that that red tape could be reversed? I mean, Germany just built an LNG port in like 5 months. So, it's obvious we can get our act together when we need.
We can do this.
Yeah.
I think, regulation has been a big part of why big nuclear is expensive. I'm all for making sure these things are safe. We have to do that. That's the primary consideration, and the industry believes that as well. The problem is that in the US, we have built every reactor custom built. They're all different, right? Even if the names are more or less the same, in detail they're different. The hope is with small modular reactors is to focus the regulation so that you can get one design approved, and then you can make 100 of them.
Right.
And ship them around the country. You build them in a factory, and you put them on a flatbed rail car and bring them to the site. It would also ease the economics because you pay for the first one, and then you use the cash flow from it to finance the second one and the third one and so on at a site.
Yeah, well, I'd read that Rolls-Royce is doing that. They've got a proposal.
So Rolls-Royce is doing that, right? So in the US, there are two companies, I remember the name of one of them, called NuScale, and I think they hope to have the first one in the ground within the next 5 or 6 years. You got to come down the learning curve. Right now, the costs are more expensive than big nuclear per kilowatt hour produced. But as they come down the learning curve and build more of these and so on, the costs should come down. They'll still be more expensive than gas, for example, to make electricity, but at least you won't have the CO2 issues. The waste issue, which people talk about also with respect to nuclear, is a technically solved problem.
Okay, how? How is it solved?
Monitored retrievable storage. You put it underground, you monitor it, the waste decays, the heat from the waste decays. After 100 years, it's almost all gone, and then you can pull it back out if you needed the energy in it. We only burn about 5% of the uranium in the waste. That's there in the waste. And so it's soluble.
So, okay, I started looking into the sorts of things we're talking about 10 years ago and maybe 15 years ago. Okay, so one of the things that really shocked me, well, there were two things. The first was that when I started looking into the energy and environment nexus in detail, I got more optimistic rather than less. And I thought, oh my God, things are a lot better than I thought they were. People are getting richer at a stunning rate. It looks like there's a positive relationship between population growth and wealth. The planet is cleaner and better off in many ways than it's been for a very long time. But there's real reasons for optimism. And then so that was shocking. Then I also learned, and this was also shocking, that there's a very positive relationship between GDP and environmental, let's call it awareness and concern. So it looks like once you get people up to about the point where in their country the average GDP is $5,000 per person, people can stop scrabbling around in the dirt and burning everything and eating everything in sight, and they can start to think about what sort of environment they'd like to have for their children and grandchildren. The other thing we do to young people, this really made me disenchanted in some ways with what was happening in universities. There were many reasons for that disenchantment, but the other thing that we convince young people of right when they're in their messianic phase, that's a Piagetian developmental stage between about 16 and 20, is that the way forward morally to take your place in broader society is by taking the route of political activism. And that basically means that what you do to be a moral person is to identify the perpetrators of the apocalyptic catastrophe and then go make life miserable for them. Instead of teaching young people that, no, you should actually spend a few decades developing the knowledge necessary to make some real progress on these fronts. You shouldn't assume that there's some cabal of enemies that you've identified when you're 18, and you certainly shouldn't assume that the mere fact that you're out waving a placard and protesting means that you're on the right side of history, or even on your own, or even in relationship to your own psychological development.
So my interaction with young people these days is mostly through the courses I teach at NYU. I teach climate and then energy, 2 separate courses to master's level students. And fortunately, I think already there are a mix of engineers and MBAs, so they have this desire to actually do something positive rather than simply, as you say, wave flags and complain about what's being done. And what I find in both courses is how much the eyes get opened up. Whether it's about the climate science, which I teach almost entirely out of the IPCC and the research literature, or the energy, which I teach, both the technologies, the business, the regulation, and so on. And, I think it's gratifying to see eyes open up. That's one of the great benefits of being a teacher, as you know. But also it shows to me that people can spend a little bit of time to learn some of these basics and then be critically questioning, inquisitive about these very complicated but important subjects.